She opened the door in tears and said, "I have no one else." The sun was beginning to lower behind the distant tree line, casting a warm amber hue over the sleepy town of Fairhollow. The streets, mostly empty by late afternoon, were bathed in a golden stillness that seemed to stretch time itself. In the modest corner lot of Maple Street stood a one-story house with peeling white paint and a front yard stubbornly resisting any attempt at landscaping. It belonged to Logan Whitaker. Logan, 28 years old, was a man of routines. He had grease-stained hands and a posture that told of years spent hunched over engines and carburetors. By trade, he was a mechanic, working at Dale's Auto Repair, a small but dependable shop on the edge of town. His days were predictable. Wrench in hand by 8 o'clock in the morning, lunch from the Seymour cooler at noon, home by 5 o'clock in the evening. That Tuesday was no different. He parked his aging blue pickup in the gravel driveway, the crunch of tires the only sound breaking the calm. With a sigh, he grabbed his lunch cooler and climbed the 2 creaking steps to the porch. The key turned, with a familiar resistance in the old lock, and he pushed the door open to a house that smelled faintly of engine oil and the faded citrus of long-evaporated cleaner. Inside, the rooms were tidy, but sparsely furnished. A well-used recliner, a coffee table cluttered with car magazines, and a television that rarely spoke filled the living room. The kitchen held a microwave, a single skillet on the stove, and a coffee maker that had seen better days. Logan lived alone and had for years. Orphaned at 16 after a car accident claimed his parents, he'd shuffled through foster homes until aging out of the system. Since then, solitude had become both his comfort and his prison. That afternoon, as the light dwindled outside, he changed into a clean shirt and jeans, cracked open a cold bottle of soda, and sank into the recliner. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling house. He didn't mind the quiet. In fact, he preferred it. Noise meant questions, and questions often led to places he had no interest in revisiting. Still, there was an ache he couldn't quite name, something that curled in his chest when he watched families laughing in diners or couples strolling through the autumn fair. He didn't envy them, not exactly, but there was a longing, distant and dull, that never quite went away. Outside, the wind shifted. Leaves skittered across the porch, whispering secrets to one another. Logan glanced at the clock, 6:30. He leaned forward to turn on the television, ready to lose himself in a rerun or perhaps an old western, when a sound broke the rhythm of his evening, a knock. 3 firm raps against the front door. He froze. Visitors were rare. He wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment he considered ignoring it, hoping the person would leave, but the knock came again, this time sharper, more urgent. Setting his bottle on the table, Logan stood and moved toward the door, each step slow and cautious. He unlocked it and opened it just wide enough to see. A woman stood on the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if shielding against more than the cool breeze. She looked about his age, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, cheeks flushed from the cold, or perhaps from tears. Her eyes, wide and glassy, met his. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go." He blinked, confusion tightening across his brow. "Do I know you?" She shook her head quickly. "No. I mean, not really. I saw your shop earlier today. You fixed the Buick with the busted axle. I was waiting in the lot. I didn't know who else to ask." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Anywhere else to go? Please. I'm not dangerous. I'm just..." "I don't have." Logan hesitated, fingers still gripping the edge of the door. She didn't look threatening, just tired and lost. He stepped back slightly, widening the gap. "Come inside. It's cold out." She looked at him, startled, as if she hadn't expected him to say yes. Then, with a grateful nod, she stepped inside, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I'm Logan," he said, closing the door behind her. "Emily," she replied softly. "Emily Carter." And with that, the quiet afternoon that had begun, like any other, took a turn Logan could never have anticipated. The air in the room shifted, as soon as the door closed behind Emily. The stillness that usually brought Logan comfort now carried an uneasy weight. She stood just inside, arms still crossed tightly over her chest, gaze flickering between the walls, the furniture, the unfamiliar safety she'd just stepped into. Logan watched her in silence for a moment, uncertain of what to say or do next. He was no stranger to solitude, but offering shelter to a complete stranger was well outside his rhythm. Emily's face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but her voice had steadied. She moved toward the couch with slow, deliberate steps, as if afraid of being told to leave. She didn't sit until Logan nodded slightly, and even then she perched at the edge, hands clenched in her lap. "I'm really sorry for showing up like this," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "Wouldn't have if I had any other choice." Logan remained standing for a moment, then walked to the kitchen, returning with a glass of water. He handed it to her without a word. She took it with both hands, nodding in silent gratitude, and sipped slowly. He sat in the recliner, elbows on his knees, watching her with guarded eyes. "I don't usually do this," she added quickly. "Place to breathe. I'm not looking for anything. I just needed a..." His voice was calm but firm. "Do you need help? I mean, medical or something like that?" She shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I'm not hurt. Just exhausted. I lost my place 2 days ago. Been staying in my car since. Then today something told me to stop at that shop. You saw your face. I don't know why I thought you'd help, but you looked safe." Logan wasn't used to being called that, safe. Most people in town knew him only as the quiet mechanic who kept to himself. He wasn't known for acts of kindness or openness. Yet something about the way Emily said it made him want to live up to the word. "You said your name's Emily?" he asked. She nodded, her gaze not leaving the glass in her hands. "Well, Emily, I've got an old guest room down the hall. Not much in it, but it's warm and quiet. You can stay there tonight." Her eyes lifted to his, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said with a small shrug. "One night, no questions tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." Tears welled up again, but she wiped them away quickly. "Thank you. Really." He stood and led her to the narrow hallway. At the end was a room with faded wallpaper and a-twin bed, a clean set of sheets, a spare pillow, and an old blanket weighted neatly folded on top. It had been years since anyone had used the room, but it held no dust. Logan kept it clean, though he never really knew why until now. "This is it," he said. "Bathrooms across the hall. I'll be up early for work." She stepped inside, her movements cautious, reverent almost. "This is more than enough, thank you." He nodded, then turned away, returning to the living room. When he sat back in his recliner, the familiar comfort didn't return. His mind stayed with the quiet presence now resting in the next room. He turned off the television and sat in the dark, listening to the distant creaks of the house, the wind outside, and the occasional rustle from down the hall. Hours passed. He didn't sleep easily. At one point around midnight, he thought he heard muffled crying. He considered getting up, offering something, a word, a glass of water, a blanket, but he stayed where he was. Maybe silence was what she needed most. It was what he had always turned to. Morning came too early. Logan rose at 6 o'clock as always and moved through his routine with an unusual heaviness. He avoided the guest room, letting her sleep. He left a note on the kitchen table. "Coffees. Fresh. Help yourself." By 7 o'clock he was at the shop, his hands already stained with oil but his mind elsewhere. The day dragged on. Customers came and went, engines were repaired, but a lingering unease followed him. When he finally returned home that evening, he was surprised to find the house as tidy as he'd left it, perhaps even more so. The coffee mug he'd used that morning was washed and drying on the rack. A faint scent of something floral lingered in the air. Emily was in the kitchen, sitting at the small table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. She looked up when he entered, offering a small tentative smile. "I hope you don't mind," she said, sitting. "I made tea and I cleaned a little. It felt better than just..." He nodded, setting his keys on the counter. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "I wanted to." They stood in the kitchen for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. Then she said, "I'll be gone by tomorrow morning. I just needed last night." Logan frowned, not in anger but in concern. "Where will you go?" She looked down. "I don't know yet." He exhaled slowly. "You don't have to rush off. If you need another night, it's fine." Her eyes met his again, softer this time. "Why are you being so kind?" He thought about it. About the lonely years, the quiet, the moments when a knock on his door might have changed everything. "Maybe I know what it's like to not have anyone." Emily didn't respond, but her silence said enough. That night, they didn't speak much. Logan made a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, and she joined him without protest. They ate quietly, sharing a table, each lost in their own thoughts, but no longer entirely alone. As the evening wore on, Emily excused herself and returned to the guest room. Logan sat on the couch this time, flipping through channels he wasn't really watching. When the house finally settled into night again, the silence felt different, not emptier but fuller somehow. The knock that had come so suddenly was no longer just a disruption. It had marked the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains in the guest room, casting pale stripes across the worn bedspread. Emily sat up slowly, blinking against the light, the unfamiliar silence of a stranger's home wrapping around her, like a second blanket. It took her a moment to remember where she was, but the scent of fresh coffee drifting down the hall brought everything back. She rose, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and walked quietly into the kitchen. Logan was already gone. His note from the previous morning had been replaced by another one, neatly written and propped against the sugar jar. "Back around 5, make yourself at home." She stared at the words for a while, wondering how someone so solitary could be so thoughtlessly generous. She hadn't planned to stay a second night, and yet now she found herself counting the hours until he returned. After cleaning the dishes and straightening the small living room again, despite it needing little attention, Emily settled into the recliner, her legs tucked beneath her. The house had a quiet rhythm that comforted her more than she expected. She ran her fingers absent-mindedly over the armrest, thinking of the days before everything began to unravel. The last 6 months had been a blur of endings. The death of her grandmother, the only family she had left, the slow unraveling of her finances, the eviction notice folded and refolded too many times to count. She hadn't told Logan much, just the surface, the pieces that wouldn't scare him away. But the truth was heavier. After her grandmother passed, Emily had tried to keep things together, to pay the rent, to keep the utilities from being shut off. She sold off furniture, cancelled every unnecessary expense, and still it hadn't been enough. The small apartment in the city slipped away like everything else. Friends she had once counted on had their own problems. Her calls went unanswered, her messages marked as read and never replied to. That day at the auto shop had been pure instinct. Her car had started, making a strange noise on the highway, and she exited at random, winding up in Fair Hollow without a plan. She parked in the lot, unsure if she would ask for directions or money, or simply sit in her car until the noise inside her own head quieted down. Then she saw Logan, bent over an engine, quiet and focused. Something about his presence, unassuming and calm, had made her get out of the car. She hadn't expected him to help, but he had. When he returned that evening, the same quiet steadiness in his eyes, she found herself standing in the kitchen before she even knew what she was going to say. "I know I said I'd leave," she began. He looked up from where he was removing his jacket, pausing. "But I don't have anywhere to go, not yet. And I don't expect anything, I don't want to be a burden. I could find some work, maybe help around here, if that's something you'd be okay with." Logan considered her words carefully, then walked to the sink and filled a glass of water, drinking slowly before speaking. "You're not a burden. You helped around here already, an artist, and I could use some help at the shop, nothing fancy. Just organizing, keeping track of parts, answering phones when it's busy, if you're up for that." Emily nodded, relief passing through her like a slow breath. "I'd really like that." The next morning, she followed him to Dale's Auto Repair. The building was a squat structure with red brick walls and large bay doors, one of which was always open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil, metal, and rubber. The walls were lined with tools arranged in careful order, and the front office, though cluttered, had a warmth to it. Photos of classic cars, a calendar that hadn't been changed in 3 months, and a desk with a chipped mug full of pens. Logan introduced her to Dale, a gruff but kind-eyed man in his 60s who gave her a skeptical once-over before shrugging. "If Logan says you're good, he said. "Long as you show up on time and don't mess with the coffee machine, we'll be fine." Emily smiled, grateful for the simplicity of the expectations. She spent the day learning the layout, labeling drawers, sorting, receipts and cleaning surfaces long neglected. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful again. She watched Logan work from afar, noting how customers trusted him, how his silence spoke louder than most people's words. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was genuine. That evening, back at the house, they sat across from each other in the kitchen again, sharing takeout sandwiches. The conversation was still sparse, but more natural now. They talked about music, her fondness for piano melodies, his for old rock ballads, and about cars, though she admitted she knew very little. He seemed amused by her curiosity, and she found his explanations oddly comforting. The days passed quietly, falling into a rhythm. Emily woke early, rode with Logan to the shop, worked until afternoon, then returned home while he finished up. She began preparing simple dinners, cleaning more thoroughly, even tending to the wild patch of yard out front. He never asked her to, but he never stopped her either. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner, Emily sat on the porch steps, watching the wind stir the trees. Logan joined her without a word, handing her a mug of warm tea. She stared into the dark yard, voice soft. "I used to think I was strong, that I could handle anything, but everything kept slipping through my fingers." He took a sip of his own tea, not pushing her to say more. "Still," she continued, "my grandmother raised me after my parents left. I don't even remember why they did. She was everything. When she died, I thought I could do it alone, but I wasn't ready for how quickly things can fall apart." Logan's voice came low. "Ground keeps giving out under you. No one's ready." "Not really, you just keep moving." Even when Emily turned to look at him, "How did you keep going?" He looked ahead, eyes fixed on the horizon, focused on what was in front of me. "I stopped trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. She nodded slowly, letting his words settle. They sat there until the night deepened and their stars blinked awake. And in that quiet moment, something shifted, not just between them, but within each of them, as if the broken edges of their lives had found a place to rest, even if only for a while. That night, something about the silence inside the house felt different. It was no longer the heavy kind that pressed against the walls and filled the corners with old echoes. Instead, it carried a stillness that made space for thought, for rest, and for something else that neither Logan nor Emily fully understood yet. After they both retreated to their rooms, Logan sat for a while on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor as the faint sounds of the night filtered in through the closed windows, the rustle of trees, a distant dog barking, the hum of their refrigerator, cycling again in the kitchen. He leaned back, arms crossed behind his head, letting the quiet wrap around him. He was tired, but his mind refused to settle. He hadn't shared his home with anyone in years. The last person who had stayed even briefly had been an old friend passing through, and even that had felt intrusive. But Emily's presence, unexpected and chaotic as it had been at first, now seemed to fit. She didn't ask for much. She gave space, helped without needing to be told, and filled the emptiness in the house with soft signs of life. Washed dishes, an open window to let in fresh air, the faint scent of tea steeping late in the evening. Down the hall, Emily sat cross-legged. On the bed in the guest room, the blanket pulled up around her shoulders. She held her phone in her lap, the screen dim, unread messages glowing faintly. She had tried to call her cousin last week, someone she hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. There had been no answer, no return call. She didn't blame her. Time and distance had created gaps that no simple words could mend. Still, the feeling of being cut loose, of drifting without anyone to catch her, was not something she could easily push away. Tonight, though, something was different. The sound of someone else moving through the same house, the knowledge that there was another person within reach, even if separated by walls and quiet, was strangely comforting. It wasn't safety in the conventional sense, it was stability. Logan didn't offer grand gestures or false reassurances, he offered structure, predictability, and a kind of respect she hadn't felt in a long time. She lay down, pulling the blanket up over her shoulder, and turned to face the window. Outside, the moonlight traced pale lines across the wall. As her eyes began to drift shut, she let her mind wander briefly, not to the worries of tomorrow, but to the gentle click of tools in the shop, the way Logan wiped his hands on the same rag after every job, the brief, unspoken way he had nodded at her when she cleaned the counter. It wasn't much, but it was enough for tonight. Later, sometime after midnight, Logan woke to a faint sound. He couldn't place it at first, not fully awake, but as he sat up and listened more closely, he realized it was the soft, muffled sound of crying. It was distant, coming from the guest room, low and broken like someone trying not to be heard. He hesitated. It was not his place to intrude. She had her space. Still, the sound tugged at him. He stepped quietly into the hallway, pausing outside her door. The crying continued, not loud, but steady. He raised a hand, uncertain, and then knocked once, softly. The crying stopped. A moment passed. Then Emily's voice, small and strained. "Yes?" "It's Logan," he said just above a whisper. "Are you okay?" There was a pause, followed by a long breath. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he replied. "I just heard something, wanted to check." Silence stretched again before she spoke. "Just a rough night." "I get it," he said. "If you need anything, I'm here." Another pause. Then, softer. "Thank you." He lingered a moment, then turned back down the hallway and returned to his room. He didn't sleep much after that, his thoughts stirring too fast, too deep. In the morning, the house was quiet again, and Emily was already in the kitchen, dressed and composed as if nothing had happened. She greeted him with a small smile and poured him a cup of coffee. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied, taking the cup. No mention was made of the night before. At the shop, their routine resumed. Emily handled the phone with surprising ease, her voice calm and clear. She organized the shelves, labeled drawers, even created a basic inventory list. Dale seemed impressed but said little. Logan noticed the way she avoided long conversations with customers, keeping her distance just enough to stay polite but guarded. It was as if she was always prepared to leave suddenly, as if the world might once again pull the floor out from beneath her feet. That afternoon, while Logan replaced a muffler beneath a rusted sedan, Emily stepped into their garage holding a clipboard. "You've got an appointment at 3 with a Mr. Halverson. Says he wants the tire pressure checked and something's rattling in the back." He slid out from under the car, wiping his hands. "Thanks." She nodded, lingering for a moment. Then, her voice quiet, she said, "Checking on me." "Last night?" "Thanks for." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "Any time." That was all. But it stayed with both of them. Not just the words, but the moment, the acknowledgement that even in silence, even in the absence of grand declarations, connection was possible. That night, Emily didn't cry. Instead, she sat on the porch for a while after dinner, watching their stars appear one by one. Logan joined her, sipping from a mug, not saying much. They sat in the cool air, two people not trying to fix each other, not asking for more than the presence of another human being in the quiet. And as the wind passed through the trees and the night deepened again, something began to settle, an understanding, unspoken but clear. The first night had been hard, but it was also the first in many that had not ended in despair, and that in itself was a kind of beginning. It was a rainy morning when Emily discovered the album. The rain had started before dawn, a steady rhythm against the windows, soaking the small town in grey light. Logan had left early topic-up parts from a nearby distributor, leaving Emily alone in the house. The quiet, normally a comfort, felt heavier, with the patter of rain drumming softly on the roof and the distant creak of tree branches swaying in the wind. She stood in the kitchen for a while, sipping tea, Watching, the water raced down the window pane in blurred trails, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. With the chores already done and nothing pressing at the shop until afternoon, she returned to her room. Her backpack lay half unzipped in the corner, untouched since the night she arrived. She hadn't dared to look through it since, unwilling to face the weight of its contents. But today, the pull of something familiar, something anchored in memory, was too strong to resist. She sat cross-legged on the bed, pulled the bag toward her and slowly unzipped it the rest of the way. Among the scattered items, folded clothes, a worn paperback, a bottle of aspirin, lay a small cloth-covered photo album. It was frayed at the edges, its once bright cover faded to a soft grey blue. Her fingers hesitated before lifting it out. She ran her hand across the surface, eyes already stinging with the pressure of unspoken thoughts. Opening the album, the scent of old paper and faint lavender drifted out. Each photo was a doorway, each face a reflection of someone she had once loved, once known. The first page held a photograph of her as a child, no older than 6, sitting in a field of tall grass with her brother Jacob. He was older by 3 years, already with that protective stance Cher remembered so well, arms slung casually around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. She stared at it for a long time, the laughter frozen in time. Jacob had always been there, at least until the drift began. The slow separation that life often brings when grief, pride, and silence weave into the spaces where words should have been. They had been close once, inseparable. But after high school, he left town chasing a job, then a life, and eventually disappeared into the blur of distant states and infrequent messages. The last time she had spoken to him was 2 years ago, shortly after their grandmother's health began to decline. She had called him, left a message, told him things were getting worse, that it might be time to come home. He never called back as... She flipped through more pages. Memories rushed in. Birthday parties, school plays, Jacob's high school graduation, the quiet smiles of their grandmother sitting in a lawn chair at every major event. The woman had raised them both after their parents left, a steady figure in a world that shifted too often. Her passing had carved a silence into Emily's life that even time refused to fill. A photo near the end caught her breath. It was one she didn't remember putting there. Jacob, older now, standing in front of a small house, arms crossed, face unreadable. It had been sent by their grandmother, tucked into a letter she'd written during the last months of her illness. The note attached was brief. He's in Oregon now, still finding his way. Emily closed the album slowly, her hands trembling slightly. The guilt she had buried under survival and necessity rose again, sharp and bitter. She hadn't called him again, hadn't tried harder. And now she didn't even know where he was. She brought the album into the living room, setting it gently on the coffee table. The rain outside continued, softer now. When Logan returned just after noon, soaked from the short trip, despite his heavy coat, he paused in the doorway at the sight of the album. Emily looked up from the couch. "I found it this morning, from before everything changed." He stepped inside, setting the bag of parts on the floor. "Family." She nodded. "My brother, Jacob. We used to be close. Haven't spoken in years." He glanced at the album, then back to her. "You ever think of calling him?" "I tried. Once, when our grandmother got sick." He didn't answer. She hesitated. "I never tried again." Logan didn't offer judgment or advice. He just sat down across from her, drying his hands on a towel. "Sometimes people don't know how to come back." She looked down at the album. "I'm not sure I'd know what to say anyway." "You don't have to say everything," he said. "Sometimes just 'I'm here' is enough." They sat in silence after that, the kind that came not from avoidance but from understanding. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to the guest room and carefully removed one of the photos. She pinned it to the wall above the bed with a piece of tape. It was the one of her and Jacob in the field, laughing at something long forgotten. It felt right there, a quiet anchor in an unfamiliar space. That night, dinner was quieter than usual. Not heavy, just thoughtful. Emily seemed distracted, but not distant. Logan noticed the way she looked at the window while eating, her fork moving slowly. When she caught him watching, She gave a small smile and shook her head as if dismissing a thought she couldn't yet explain. Later, as Logan washed the dishes and Emily dried them, she asked, "Do you have any photos?" He looked at her, then at the window above the sink. "A teenager. After the accident, I didn't keep much. Not many, I lost most of them when I was..." She didn't press. Instead, she handed him the last plate, letting the weight of their shared past settle gently between them. They were two people walking forward through the long echoes of what once was, learning to step carefully together, even in the quiet. The rain passed during the night, leaving behind a soft, damp mist that hovered over Fair Hollow like a half-forgotten thought. The early hours brought a diffused light through the clouds, painting the town in hues of silver and pale green. Logan's morning was as routine as ever. He rose before 6 o'clock, made coffee, dressed in his work shirt and jeans, and stepped outside to find the air filled with the scent of wet earth and pine. But when he returned to the kitchen to pour second cup of coffee, Emily was already awake, sitting at the table with her hands around a mug that had long gone cold. She didn't speak right away, and neither did he. The room felt heavier than usual, the kind of weight that builds slowly, not from a single moment but from an accumulation of small things left unsaid. Logan poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her from the corner of his eye. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her face drawn in a way that suggested sleep had not come easily. The photo album lay closed on the table between them, as if even in its silence it continued to speak too loudly. "You sleep okay?" he asked after a while. She nodded, though it wasn't convincing. More or less. Logan didn't press. He finished his coffee and left for work with the same quiet efficiency as always. Emily watched him go, then sat in silence long after the sound of his truck faded down the road. She couldn't explain the heaviness she felt. It wasn't new grief. It was something more hollow, like the aftermath of a storm that had taken nothing visible but had shifted, something deep underneath. The memories brought up by the photos had lingered in her mind all night, not as sharp pain, but as a dull, persistent ache, an ache for words not spoken, for moments missed, for chances never taken. She moved through the house slowly that morning, cleaning more than was necessary. The floors didn't need mopping, but she did it anyway. The windows were already clean, but she wiped them down again. She organized the contents of the pantry, not because it needed it, but because staying still was unbearable. With every movement, she tried to shake the feeling that she had failed in some quiet, irreversible way, not just with Jacob, but with herself. When she arrived at the shop just before noon, Logan was in the garage, under the hood of a classic Chevy. He glanced up, nodded once, and went back to work. Emily stepped into the office, grateful for something to focus on. She answered calls, organized invoices, sorted out parts orders that had been delayed by the weather. But even then, a quiet tension clung to her, a sense of emotional vertigo she couldn't fully ignore. Logan noticed. He said nothing, but he watched her closely when she wasn't looking, recognizing the signs not just from observation, but from experience. He'd worn that same expression himself once, an inward struggle dressed in calm, a silent reckoning that rarely asked for help, but needed it all the same. During lunch, they sat outside on the small bench behind the shop. The clouds had begun to break, allowing shafts of sunlight to pierce through and warm the damp pavement. Emily picked at a sandwich without much interest, her gaze distant. "You don't have to push so hard," Logan said, his tone even. She blinked and looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've been cleaning everything twice. You're not really eating, you're walking like someone who's waiting to fall." She hesitated, lips parted slightly, unsure how to respond. Then she set the sandwich down and looked away. "I'm trying to stay useful, that's all." "You're not here because you're useful," he said. "That's enough. You're here because you needed a place." Emily took a breath, deep and uneven. "If I never get back to anything normal, I just keep thinking, what if I never figure it out?" What? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a small pebble and rolled it between his fingers before flicking it into the lot. Maybe normal's not something you get back to. Maybe it's something you build again from wherever you're standing. She looked down at her hands. And if I don't know how, you learn, he said simply, a little at a time. That evening they returned home in silence. Emily retreated to the guest room almost immediately, and Logan gave her the space. He cooked dinner alone, left a plate for her on Theatable, and sat in the living room with the television on low volume, more for company than entertainment. Hours passed before she reappeared. She didn't say anything, just picked up the plate and ate it quietly at the table. Afterward, she joined him on the couch, neither of them acknowledging the distance that had lingered all day. They sat for a long while like that, the sound of rain, returning softly against the windows, the glow of the screen casting pale light across the room. Finally, Emily spoke. "I didn't just lose my home," she said. "I lost my sense of who I was, of what I was even trying to become, and I keep waiting for that to come back. But it hasn't. Not even a little." Logan turned to look at her, not with pity, but with the kind of understanding that only comes from having been there. Sometimes the only way to remember who you are is to stop trying so hard to find it. Let it come to you, piece by piece. She nodded, slowly, her eyes. "Never leaving the screen, I want to believe that." "You don't have to yet," he said. "Now just keep sitting with it, keep waking up. That's enough for..." And in that moment, under the quiet hush of the rain and the dim glow of a flickering television, the silence between them lost its weight. It became a place to rest, a space where healing didn't need to announce itself loudly. It could arrive slowly, without fanfare, like morning light through a cracked door. By the time the following week arrived, the rhythm of their coexistence had settled into something more than habit. It was quiet and functional, without fanfare, yet within it lay a subtle comfort. Logan continued his work at the shop with the same focused intensity, while Emily took on more tasks each day, organizing, cleaning, handling customer inquiries. But beneath the surface of their shared routine, something was quietly shifting. Logan noticed it first in the way Emily moved, her steps less hesitant, her voice a touch steadier when she answered the phone, the occasional hum of a tune as she worked alone in the front office. There was still a fragility to her, but it no longer felt as though the weight of the world might crush her at any moment. She still carried shadows in her eyes, but they were not as heavy as before. It began one morning when Logan arrived at the shop to find Emily already there, a cup of coffee waiting for him and a list of tasks written neatly on the office whiteboard. He raised an eyebrow at the unexpected initiative, but said nothing, simply nodding in quiet appreciation. She smiled just slightly before returning to her computer screen. Later that day, as he sorted through a shipment of brake pads in the garage, he called out to her, "How are you at organizing inventory?" Emily stepped into the bay with her sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. Probably better than you, he gave a dry chuckle and handed her a box of parts. "Guess we'll find out." Over the next few hours, they worked side by side in the storage room behind the garage. It was a tight space, cluttered with years of poorly stacked boxes, dusty shelves, and scattered tools. Logan had meant to tackle it for months, but never found the time or the patience. With Emily's help, the chaos began to unravel. She created a system, labeling each shelf and grouping parts by category. As they worked, they fell into a natural rhythm, their movements synchronized without needing much conversation. Between labeling and lifting boxes, Emily said, "I used to help my grandmother with her sewing supplies. She kept everything in cookie, tins and old shoe boxes. It was always a mess, but she knew exactly where everything was." Logan glanced at her. "You sound like you didn't like it." She smiled faintly. "I hated it. Every time I tried to help her organize, she'd tell me I was ruining her system. But now I think maybe she just didn't want to change something that still worked." He nodded. "Sometimes messy works, but clean's easier on the eyes." By the end of the day, the storage room looked almost professional. Emily stood back, hands on her hips, and let out a small, satisfied sigh. Logan surveyed the shelves, impressed. "You might have just saved me a week's worth of frustration." "Then you're welcome," she said with a playful tilt of her head. He shook his head, amused, and turned back to the garage. "I should start paying you." Emily's smile faded slightly, not from offense, but from the reminder that this arrangement was still temporary, undefined. "I'm just glad to be doing something." That evening, after returning home, Logan invited her to stay for dinner without hesitation. It was a simple meal, pan-fried potatoes, scrambled eggs, toast, but they sat together at the table without the usual quiet distance. Emily told him about the neighbor who used to live across from her and her grandmother, a retired musician who played trumpet on his porch every Sunday. Logan shared a rare memory from his childhood about a summer he spent building a soapbox car with his father, just before the accident that took both his parents' lives. They didn't speak of sadness directly, but the stories held their own kinds of grief, gently passed between them like fragile heirlooms. Neither tried to fix the other's pain. They just listened. After dinner, Logan brought out an old toolbox and placed it on the coffee table. "Meaning to clean this out," he said. "Want to help?" "I've been." They sat on the floor together, sorting through rusted wrenches, stray bolts, and faded instruction manuals. Emily asked questions about the different tools, and Logan explained each with the quiet authority of someone who had spent years mastering them. She held up a small, oddly shaped device. "What's this one?" "Torque wrench," he replied. "Measures how tight a bolt is." She tested the mechanism, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This specific. I had no idea tools could be. They're all about control," he said. "Apart. You over-tighten, things break. Too loose and things fall." She looked at him for a moment, thoughtful. "There's a metaphor in there somewhere." "Probably," he said with a faint smile. "It's done right. But I just like knowing something will stay in place when they..." Continued sorting until the toolbox was neatly arranged, each tool in its proper slot. Emily leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. "I feel like I did something real today." "You did," he said. She turned her head toward him. "It's the first time in months I've felt that way." Logan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into the toolbox and pulled out a small socket wrench, holding it up. "You want to learn how to use this?" Her eyes lit up with curiosity. "Are you offering to teach me?" He nodded. "You've earned a promotion." She laughed, the sound light and unguarded, and took the wrench from his hand. Then accept. As the night deepened, they sat there, surrounded by tools and the quiet hum of possibility. The house, once defined by its silences and stillness, now held the gentle buzz of change, not loud or sudden, but steady and true. And though neither said it aloud, both knew something had begun to shift, not just in their shared space, but in themselves. What had started as an act of kindness, a gesture born from instinct and empathy, was slowly becoming something more substantial, something built not with declarations or promises, but with small acts of trust, layered day by day like pieces in a carefully repaired machine. The last days of September came with a sudden shift in the air. Mornings grew crisper, and the trees lining Fair Hollow's narrow roads began to show their first hints of color: burnt orange, deep crimson, and golden yellow creeping into green. Logan adjusted his routine to the seasonal change without a word. He pulled an old flannel from the closet, began warming the truck for longer in the mornings, and picked up a heavier pair of work gloves. Emily noticed all of it from the sidelines, quietly integrating these rhythms into her own expanding list of habits. In the shop, the work stayed steady. Logan fixed a failing alternator, rebuilt a worn-out clutch, and installed new brake lines on a stubborn pickup that had been sitting in Dale's lot for weeks. Emily, meanwhile, had become something of a fixture. Regular customers began to greet her by name, and even Dale, who was slow to trust, started asking her to check orders and track invoices without being prompted. But the quiet balance between Emily and Logan began to stir in subtle, invisible ways. Glance held a moment longer, silences more charged with unspoken things. It was not discomfort, but rather a slow awareness building between them, one neither rushed to define. They shared coffee on cold mornings without speaking, and in the evenings they cooked together, falling into a rhythm that felt as though it had always been there. It was during one such evening, after dinner and the dishes were done, that Emily received the message. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and she picked it up absently, expecting another promotional text or a weather alert. Instead, she froze, the screen casting a faint glow against her face. Logan, who was drying a plate, noticed the shift. In her expression, "Everything okay?" he asked. She stared at the screen for a moment longer before answering, from her in over a year. "It's Rachel. I haven't heard. Rachel," he repeated. "A friend. From before. She and I used to be really close. She just sent a message out of nowhere. Said she heard I'd been having a rough time." Logan set the plate down. "How'd she hear that?" "I don't know. Maybe someone saw something online, or maybe she ran into someone from back then. She didn't say." Emily scrolled through the brief message again. "She's living in Michigan now. Said she's got a spare room and I should come visit. That it might be a good place to reset." Logan didn't speak right away. She looked up and met his gaze. He wasn't frowning, but something unreadable flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginnings of hesitation. "Are you thinking of going?" he asked finally. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Part of me wants to. It'd be good to see a familiar face, but I don't know if I'm ready to step back into that version of myself." He nodded slowly, turning back to the towel in his hands. "You don't have to decide tonight." Emily stood at the window after that, watching the shadows stretch across the yard as night deepened. Her mind ran in circles. Rachel had been more than just a friend. She'd been Theon, who always pulled Emily out of her own head, the one who could read her with a glance. But their friendship had frayed over time, stretched too thin by distance, missed calls, and diverging lives. Still, hearing from her now stirred something restless. The following day, Emily texted Rachel back. She asked about the offer, about the city Rachel lived in now, about what kind of work might be available nearby. Rachel responded quickly, with enthusiasm that felt both comforting and strange. She described a small town just outside Grand Rapids, a school that might be hiring administrative help, a community center with art classes, quiet neighborhoods. It sounded almost too convenient, too perfectly timed, but it also sounded like a door she hadn't realized was still open. That evening she brought it up again. Logan was changing the oil on his truck in the driveway, his sleeves pushed up, hands already dark with grease. Emily stood nearby, her arms crossed against the evening chill. "I think I'm going to go," she said, "just for a few days. To visit, see what it feels like." He didn't look up immediately. "When?" "Maybe Friday, if that's okay." He nodded once. "It's your call." She hesitated. "I'm not leaving for good. Not yet. I just need to know if that part of me still exists. The part that had a plan, that thought she knew what she was doing." Logan wiped his hands and set down the wrench. "I get it. Do you?" she asked, watching him. "I do," he said, going back to, "Sometimes you need to look at something from a distance to know if it's worth." She didn't say anything more, neither did he. The quiet that followed wasn't strained, but neither was it easy. It felt like standing at the edge of something, both of them aware that this visit, however short, might shift the balance between them in ways they couldn't predict. When Friday came, Logan drove her to the bus station 2 towns over. They didn't talk much during the ride. Emily kept her hands clasped in her lap, her backpack resting between her feet. When they arrived, she stood beside the bench, turning toward him with a soft expression. "Thanks for everything," she said. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. She nodded once, then added, "I'll call when I get there." "I'll be here," he said. The bus arrived with a low rumble, its headlights cutting through the morning fog. Emily boarded without looking back, and Logan waited until it was out of sight before he turned and walked slowly back to his truck. The return drive felt longer than it should have. The house, when he entered it again, was exactly as he had left it. But it felt different now, emptier in small ways, like the absence of her coat on the hook, her mug beside the sink, the faint scent of lavender that had clung to the guest room like memory. He didn't touch anything. He simply stood in the kitchen, staring at the window as the morning light began to climb across the trees, wondering how long silence could stretch before it became something else entirely. The small town of Cedar Hollow, nestled between flat fields and stretches of forest just outside Grand Rapids, was quieter than Emily remembered from her last visit years ago. When the bus finally rolled into the station, the sun had already begun its slow descent behind the autumn-colored trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. Rachel was waiting by the curb, leaning against a silver hatchback with her arms crossed and a tentative smile on her face. Emily stepped down, bag slung over her shoulder, and paused. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Rachel walked forward and wrapped her in a brief but firm hug. The warmth was familiar but not unchanged. "You look good," Rachel said, pulling back to study her. "Makes sense. Tired, but more grounded." "If that, I'm figuring things out," Emily replied, unsure if it was true but feeling closer to it than she had in months. They drove in near silence, the hum of the engine and the occasional sigh of wind filling their space between them. Rachel's neighborhood was a neat row of bungalows, each one with trimmed lawns and modest porches decorated for the season, pumpkins, wreaths of dried leaves, strings of tiny lights. Her house, a pale green cottage with white shutters, was simple but inviting. Inside, the smell of baked apples and cinnamon lingered in the air, and the warmth of lived-in space enveloped Emily like a blanket. That first evening, they caught up over dinner, pasta, garlic bread, and a salad that neither of them ate much of. Rachel talked about her job at the community center, her failed attempt at pottery classes, and the slow process of rebuilding her own life after a divorce the previous year. Emily listened, smiled where appropriate, and shared pieces of her own journey, carefully chosen, edited for ease. She mentioned Logan briefly, just enough to acknowledge his importance without exposing too much. "He sounds solid," Rachel said, pouring another glass of wine. "Don't know. There's something in your voice. The way you talk about him." Emily looked down at her glass. "Like that? He's been kind, steady. It's been a long time since I felt safe." Rachel nodded slowly, leaning back in her chair. "You think about staying there?" "I think about what it would mean to leave." Emily said think about was getting out, which is new. For a while, all I could the next day. Rachel took her around the town. Quiet streets, local shops, the park near the lake, where people walked their dogs and children fed ducks with crusts of bread. It was peaceful, familiar in the way that small towns often are, with friendly nods from strangers and slow traffic at intersections. They visited the community center, where Rachel introduced her few colleagues, one of whom casually mentioned an opening at the front desk. Emily smiled, took the pamphlet they offered, but her fingers hesitated on the edges. She'd hanked them, but said little else. That night, Rachel brought it up again. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said, "but it's here if you want it." Emily nodded, staring out the window at the empty street bathed in orange streetlight. "I know." She spent 3 nights in Cedar Hollow, each one quieter than the last. By the third morning, she found herself waking before dawn, slipping, outside with a cup of coffee and standing barefoot on the porch. The chill bit at her skin, but she didn't move. She watched the sky shift from black to indigo, then to the first faint blush of day. Her thoughts weren't loud but persistent. She thought of the small guest room back in Logan's house, the photo pinned above the bed. She thought of his steady hands, the quiet way he offered space, the warmth in his voice when he told her it was okay not to have all the answers. She thought of the silence in his kitchen that never felt empty, and the space they had built, not defined, not perfect, but real. Rachel joined her outside a few minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, cradling her own mug. "You seem far away," she said softly. "I am," Emily replied. "Not in a bad way, just not fully here." "You miss him?" Emily didn't answer right away. She sipped her coffee, letting the heat settle into her chest. "Think I miss the quiet more than anything. Not the kind that isolates you, the kind that holds you." Rachel studied her for a long moment, then said, "You've changed." Emily looked over, surprised. "How? You used to fill every silence. Now you sit in them like you belong there." That day, Emily packed her bag without needing to debate it. Rachel didn't question the decision, only offered to drive her to the station. On the ride back, they spoke little, but Thessalon's wasn't awkward. When they arrived, Rachel pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine. "You know where I am," she said. "Always." "I know," Emily replied, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Have choices. Thank you for reminding me." Rachel nodded, smiling through a shimmer of emotion. "Go see where your quiet leads." The bus pulled away under a sky slowly clearing of clouds, the landscape rolling past in muted colors of fall. Emily rested her head against the window, watching fields blur into trees, trees into houses, and houses into distance. She wasn't returning with answers, but with something steadier, clarity born not of certainty but of recognition. What she had found in Fairhollow wasn't a solution, but a starting place. When the bus pulled into the familiar stop near town, the air had cooled further. She stepped down, bag in hand, heart beating with a strange blend of anticipation and calm. There was noon waiting at the curb, no dramatic return, just the sound of wind in the leaves and the scent of pine and fuel in the air. Emily walked the familiar road toward the house, her feet moving without hesitation. Each step felt deliberate, not rushed. She wasn't running from anything now. She wasn't chasing something new. She was returning not out of fear but out of choice. And as the roof of the house appeared beyond the bend and the path curved gently toward home, Emily smiled. Not because everything had fallen into place, but because for the first time, a long while, she knew exactly where she was going. By the time Emily returned to Fairhollow, the leaves had begun their final transformation, scattering the sidewalks and yards with crisp reds and golds. The scent of wood smoke lingered faintly in the air, and the days now ended sooner, fading into twilight long before dinner time. She arrived just after 4 o'clock, her bag slung over her shoulder, her steps steady and measured as she approached the familiar white house at the end of Maple Street. It was quiet as ever, unchanged in appearance, but as she stepped up the porch steps, something in her chest stirred. She hesitated before knocking. The silence that had once unnerved her now felt like a promise of peace, of presence, of something unspoken waiting just beyond the door. When she finally knocked, there was a pause, then the sound of footsteps. Logan opened the door, wearing his usual work clothes, his hands still faintly marked with grease. He didn't speak right away. His eyes searched hers, not with urgency, but with the quiet recognition of someone who had been waiting, not passively, but with quiet faith that the choice to return would be hers to make. She gave a small nod, and in that gesture, something between them settled. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, stepping aside. "Come in." Inside, the house was just as she had left it, warm, lived in, with a faint scent of coffee and the soft hum of the heater. Her coat was still on the hook, her mug still beside the sink. It was as if nothing had moved, yet everything felt different. She set her bag down gently and looked around, then back at Logan. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed this," she said. "I didn't touch your room," he replied. "Figured you might come back." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I would. Not because I didn't want to, just I needed to see what else was out there. Make sure I wasn't just clinging to this because I had nothing else." He nodded. "And?" "I wasn't." She said it wasn't this. I mean, yes, Rachel's place was nice, peaceful, and I could have stayed. But Logan gestured toward the kitchen. "You want coffee?" "I'd love some," she said. They sat at the kitchen table with steaming mugs between them, the evening light slanting in through the window. Emily cradled her cup in both hands, savoring the warmth. The silence between them was familiar now, and within it lay a growing understanding. "Rachel asked if I was thinking of staying here," she said after a moment. "Back in Fairhollow. I didn't know how to answer. I still don't fully know. But I told her something I hadn't said out loud yet." Logan looked at her, waiting. "I told her that when I was with you, I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I'd already started, like the hardest part was done." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying her face. "Changed since the first night?" She smiled. "Begin." "I had to. I was tired of surviving. I wanted to live again. I just didn't know where to." "And now?" She took a slow breath. "Now I know it doesn't have to be all at once. It can start with one steady day. One quiet room, one person who sees you and doesn't ask for anything you're not ready to give." The words hung in the air, not heavy, but full. "I never wanted to push you," Logan said. "Figure it out. I just wanted you to have a place where you could—" "You gave me more than that," she said. "You gave me something to come back to." He looked down at his mug, then back up. "So what now?" Emily stood and walked to the window, staring out at the yard where leaves had begun to gather in colorful drifts. "Now I unpack. I take it one day at a time. I help at the shop. I maybe look for something else here too, something steady, and I keep showing up. Logan stood as well, walking to stand beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, sending a few leaves fluttering to the ground. "I'm glad you came back," he said. She turned to him. "So am I." That night, she settled back into the guest room. It hadn't changed, but she saw it with new eyes. The photo of her and Jacob still hung above the bed, and as she unpacked, she placed a few more pictures beside it. One of her grandmother, one from a school event years ago, and a new one printed before she left Rachel's. The lake, the bench, the early morning sky. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks, the kind of sleep that only comes when you are exactly where you're meant to be. In the following days, Emily eased back into her routine with Logan. They returned to the shop together each morning, shared lunch at the back bench, and spent the evenings in comfortable, familiar quiet. She continued helping with the office, but now she also began looking for something more permanent, a role at the local library, a part-time opening at the elementary school, even a night course on community development that piqued her interest. Every small step she took felt different now. Not forced, not reactive, chosen. And as she moved through each day, she carried with her the realization that what she had found in Fair Hollow wasn't a temporary refuge. It was a foundation, something solid, something that had quietly, patiently waited for her to return and build from it, one piece at a time. The air in Fair Hollow was cooler now, touched with the first bite of early October. The trees, once just tinged with color, had fully embraced the season, their canopies ignited with deep red and gold, shedding leaves that danced across sidewalks and gathered in quiet corners. Emily stood at the edge of the town square one morning, watching the wind carry a small whirlwind of leaves past the old bakery. She clutched a folder to her chest, the edges of official looking papers peeking out from inside, and took a deep breath before turning toward the community center. It had taken several days after her return for her to find the courage to apply for work beyond the shop. Logan never pressured her, never asked what her long-term plan was, but something in the way he continued to leave a second coffee mug out each morning and how he cleared a drawer in the kitchen without mentioning it told her he believed she was staying, and the truth was, so did she. But believing wasn't the same as building, and she knew it was time to do more than simply stay. Inside the center, she met with a kind woman named Janice who managed the programs and operations. The conversation was simple and direct. Yes, they needed administrative help. Yes, her experience at the shop and with her grandmother's records made her a good fit. Yes, she could start part-time next week. When she stepped outside again, job offer in hand, the sky seemed a little clearer, the wind a little softer. That evening, as she walked up the steps of Logan's porch, the light in the living room cast a soft glow through the front windows. She paused before opening the door, then smiled to herself and stepped inside. Logan looked up from his place on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, a book resting on his knee. His expression didn't change, but his eyes held a quiet curiosity. "How'd it go?" he asked. She held up the folder. "I start Monday, just a few hours a day to start, but it's something." He nodded once. "Good, that's good." She crossed the room and sat across from him. "I've been thinking about everything, about how I ended up here that night at your door. It felt like desperation. But now I think it was something else." "What do you mean?" "I think it was instinct. Some part of me still knew where I needed to go even when I didn't understand why." Logan didn't speak for a moment. Then he closed the book gently and said, "Getting lost to realize what you're meant to find. Sometimes it takes." Emily leaned back against the cushions, her eyes drifting toward the window. The leaves continued to fall outside, each one making its slow descent to the earth. "I used to think going back to the beginning meant failure, like I was erasing progress. But now it feels like I'm rewriting the start." "You're not the same person who knocked on my door," Logan said. "Same either. You changed it. And this place isn't the..." She smiled at that, the truth of his words warming her more than she expected. "I was scared of coming back. Thought I'd feel like I was starting over, but it doesn't feel like that anymore." "What does it feel like?" She took a breath. It feels like continuing, like I picked up the story in the right place. They spent the rest of the evening in quiet comfort. Emily helped prepare dinner, baked chicken, roasted carrots, and the last of the summer corn. They ate slowly, sharing small thoughts, little observations. Logan told her about an elderly customer who still brought her Karen every month just to hear it start. Emily shared a memory of her grandmother, teaching her how to fold linens the proper way, a ritual that used to frustrate her, but now brought a strange kind of peace. That night, as she returned to her room, Emily opened the drawer where she'd placed the few photos she brought back from Rachel's. She chose one, the early morning shot by the lake, and pinned it beside the others. The small wall above the bed was beginning to look like a mosaic of her life, each image a piece of a larger picture she was only beginning to understand. The next morning, she awoke before dawn, her eyes opening naturally with the soft light filtering through the curtains. She made her way to the kitchen, brewed the coffee, and stood by the window with her hands wrapped around the warm mug. When Logan entered a few minutes later, already dressed for the shop, she greeted him with a quiet smile. "Was thinking," she said, "maybe after work we could take a walk through the woods. There's a path behind the shop I noticed last week. Might be nice." Logan considered it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, that sounds good." They rode to the shop together as usual, but the weight between them was lighter now, like the difference between holding on and holding out. Emily moved through her tasks with a new kind of energy. She organized the week's invoices, called in a shipment order, and even rearranged the front desk layout to make more space. Dale noticed but said nothing, just grunted in approval when the cluttered corner suddenly looked usable. By the time the afternoon waned into evening, the sky had begun to glow with the fading sun. True to her word, Emily met Logan behind the shop, where the dirt path wound gently through the trees. They walked in silence at first, the sound of leaves crunching beneath their feet. The woods smelled of earth and pine, and the light filtered through the branches like something sacred. "I used to walk like this with Jacob," Emily said after a while. "Back before everything got complicated. We'd make up stories about where the path would lead, even though we always knew it ended at the same place." Logan glanced at her. "Where was that?" "A little clearing near the creek. Nothing special. But back then, it felt like a destination. Like a secret place just for us. You ever think about calling him?" "I do," she admitted, "but I think I need to keep moving forward before I reach back." They reached a bend in the trail, where a fallen log offered a place to sit. They paused there, watching the last light of day flicker through the trees. "I don't know what the next year looks like," Emily said softly, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." "That's a good place to start," Logan replied. She turned to him, her voice steady. "It feels like I'm home." He didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. His presence beside her, unwavering and still, was the answer she had been searching for since the moment she arrived. And there, in the soft hush of the woods, Emily realized she had not only returned to the beginning, she had redefined it. Her own terms, in her own time, and with a heart more whole than she ever thought possible. The first week at the community center passed in a blur of schedules, spreadsheets, and warm greetings from strangers. Emily settled quickly into the rhythm of her new role, the work familiar enough to ease into, but new enough to challenge her focus. The front desk became her anchor, answering phones, organizing registrations, greeting parents and seniors alike. That sense of purpose that had eluded her for so long returned in quiet waves, not through grand achievements but through consistency, reliability, and connection. Fair Hollow too began to feel less like a place she had landed by accident, and more like somewhere she had deliberately chosen. The once foreign streets now carried her footprints, the local cafe remembered her order, and the librarian knew her name. These were the small marks of belonging, the evidence of a life beginning to take shape beyond survival. Logan noticed the difference even before she did. It was in her posture, the way she carried herself, the softness of her smile in the morning. She no longer hovered at the edge of the kitchen waiting for permission to move. She reached for plates, opened windows, played music low in the background as she cooked. At the shop, she continued to help on weekends and evenings when needed, but her focus was clearly shifting toward the center. Logan didn't mind. If anything, he admired the steady way she was building something of her own. They still shared dinner most nights, and though their conversations remained measured, they held more depth. They talked about future things now, small dreams, community projects, and the idea of attending the town's autumn festival together. It was as though the silence between them had been replaced with potential, a quiet understanding that whatever they were becoming, it was unfolding at a pace neither needed to rush. One evening, as October reached its midpoint and the nights grew colder, Emily returned home with a folded paper in her hand. She entered the kitchen where Logan was drying dishes, placed the paper on the table, and sat across from him. "It's from the school," she said. "They're looking for a part-time administrative assistant. Same hours as the center, but it pays more, benefits too." He looked at the flyer, then at her. "You thinking of applying?" She nodded. "I think I'm ready to try." "Then you should." "It's strange," she said. "Job offers. A few months ago I was sleeping in my car. Now I'm choosing between." Logan gave a small smile. "You earned it. All of it." She looked down at her hands. "I still get scared sometimes, that it'll all fall apart again." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong," he said. "It just means you remember." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Me back?" "I do. But I also remember what brought." He didn't pull away. His hand stayed under hers, steady and warm. "Then hold on to that." The next morning, Emily submitted her application to the school and continued her hours at the center without missing a beat. She began spending her lunch breaks in the town library, researching early childhood education programs and community outreach grants. The idea of building something lasting no longer felt impossible. It felt necessary. Logan, for his part, continued to carry out his days with quiet steadiness. But he too was beginning to change in subtle ways. He lingered longer in conversations with customers, laughed more often with Dale, and even began repairing the back porch, a project he had put off for years. When Emily asked what prompted the sudden motivation, he shrugged and said, "Felt like time." One weekend they visited the farmer's market together. It was a crisp Saturday morning, Thiessen low but bright, and the square bustling with families and vendors. Emily bought honey from a local beekeeper, while Logan examined hand-carved tools from an older gentleman who ran a woodworking booth. They moved through the crowd side by side, sometimes brushing shoulders, always aware of the shared space between them. Later, as they sat on a bench with hot cider in hand, Emily turned to him. "About what you'd be doing now if I hadn't shown up? Do you ever think?" He thought for a moment. "Home to a quiet house. Probably the same things, fixing cars, drinking bad coffee, coming." She smiled. "That doesn't sound terrible." "It wasn't," he said. "But it's better now." "Better? How?" He glanced at her, his gaze steady. "Now it's not just quiet, it's full." Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder and watched the crowd move past them in waves. For the first time in a long time, she felt no pressure to define what they were, where they were going, or what might come next. Being here, in this moment, was enough. That night, back at the house, Logan fixed a loose door hinge while Emily prepared soup on the stove. The scent of garlic and thyme filled the air, mingling with the woodsy smell that always clung to his jacket. The radio played softly in the background, and the occasional crackle of logs in the fireplace broke the otherwise peaceful quiet. After dinner, Emily sat in the living room with her legs curled beneath her, reading a book about rural education systems. Logan joined her after finishing the dishes, setting down a mug of tea beside her. She looked up and smiled. "I've been thinking about the holidays," she said. "Maybe we could do something here, just simple. I could bake. You could cook something other than eggs." "I make a decent roast," he replied, feigning offense. Then, "It's settled," she said. "First holiday. Our way." He didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. As the fire burned low and the night settled around them, the walls of the house seemed to hold their own kind of warmth, built not from heat alone but from presence, intention, and the slow, steady trust that comes when two people choose day after day to stay. And within that warmth, new beginnings were not announcements, they were acts, quiet, real and enduring. The wind had shifted again. It no longer whispered of autumn's arrival, but hinted at the coming of winter. Fair Hollow prepared itself in quiet ways. Storm windows were latched, scarves and gloves appeared at market stalls, and the smell of chimney smoke became a daily comfort. Logan raked the yard each afternoon, gathering crisp leaves into slow-burning piles along the fence. Emily had started wearing thicker sweaters and brought home canned goods from the center's surplus pantry, preparing meals with an ease she hadn't possessed months ago. It had been nearly 3 months since that first knock on Logan's door. One evening, as the last light faded behind the trees and the sky took on a soft gray hue, Logan stood on the porch sipping from a chipped blue mug. The world was still around him. No passing cars, no barking dogs, just the rustle of drying leaves skimming along the road. Inside, the radio played low, and the scent of roasting vegetables drifted out through the open screen door. He hadn't realized until now how much he'd come to rely on these quiet moments, not for solitude, but for reflection. Emily stepped outside a moment later, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She leaned against the railing beside him, her hair pulled back loosely, cheeks flushed from the oven's heat. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. He nodded, then tilted his head slightly. "You hear that?" She listened, brow furrowing. "I don't hear anything." "Exactly," he replied. "No traffic, no machines, just stillness. I used to be afraid of silence," she admitted. "The sound of peace. Thought it meant I was forgotten. Now I think it's—" He looked at her, studying the way the porch light caught the edge of her profile. "You're not forgotten." She met his eyes. "I know." After dinner, they settled into the living room, the fire flickering warmly in the hearth. Emily tucked her feet beneath her and picked up the small notebook she'd been writing in each evening. Logan sat beside her, not reading, not speaking, simply existing in that shared space. The clock ticked softly in the background, a rhythm that no longer reminded them of time passing, but of time well spent. Eventually, Emily closed the notebook and placed it on the coffee table. "You said that first night?" "Do you remember what I said?" "A lot of things," he replied. "You told me, if you need anything, I'm here." She smiled, her gaze distant but soft. "No one had said that to me in a long time, not like that, not with nothing expected in return. You didn't owe me anything. But I wanted to give something back," she said, "reminded me I could. Not because I felt I had to, but because you." Logan reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers before curling gently around them. "More than you know. You brought this place back to life. You gave." They sat that way for a while, hand in hand, eyes on the fire, neither needing to speak to be understood. The connection between them was no longer a question, no longer something they danced around, or left undefined. It was not dramatic, not built on declarations, but steady, resilient, and rooted in days shared in quiet purpose. Later that week, Emily received confirmation from the school. Her application had been accepted. She would begin working mornings starting November, with afternoons remaining free for the center. She shared the news with Logan over breakfast, their usual blend of toast, eggs, and black coffee. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said. The words settled around her like warmth. As the weekend arrived, they visited the town's autumn fair together. Booths lined the square, lit with strings of warm lights, vendors selling handmade scarves, honey jars, and baked goods. Children ran past with painted faces, the scent of cinnamon and pine weaving through the cool air. Emily and Logan moved through, the crowd slowly stopping for hot cider and sharing a caramel apple as they walked. At one point, a woman from the center recognized Emily and waved her over. They spoke briefly, and Logan watched from a few steps back as Emily laughed easily, her posture open and confident. She belonged here now, not just in the town, but within herself. When she returned to him, he reached for her hand without hesitation. They returned home just after dusk, the sky deep blue, stars beginning to pierce through the thinning clouds. Emily set the cider mugs down in the kitchen and pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders. Logan lit the fire, and they sat once again in its glow, a ritual that had come to mark the end of each day. A knock came at the door, not loud, just soft and uncertain. Logan stood, brow furrowed, and crossed the room. When he opened it, Emily stood behind him, curious. A boy of about 11 stood on the porch, his jacket too thin for the cold. He held a slip of paper in his hand and looked up at Logan with wide eyes. "I think I'm lost," the boy said. "I was trying to get to the park, but I turned the wrong way." Logan stepped outside, speaking gently. "You're close. Just 2 blocks over." The boy nodded. "Thank you." Logan offered to walk him to the corner, and Emily watched from the porch as the two disappeared into the distance. When Logan returned, she was waiting with a blanket draped over one arm. He reminded me of Jacob, she said. Maze, back when he was little and thought every street was a Logan, took the blanket from her and nodded. "You should call him." "I will," she replied. "Tell him. Not because I need closure, but because I finally have something real to." She paused, then added, "I'm okay. I'm not lost anymore." They stood there together in the fading light, the world quiet around them. In the months that followed, the house continued to fill with life. Not loud or chaotic, but steady, a place of routines, shared meals, small joys. Emily's job at the school grew into something more permanent, and she began helping to organize reading programs. Logan's business continued to thrive, bolstered by word of mouth and quiet reliability. And one evening, long after the snow had fallen and the world outside was blanketed in white, someone knocked at the door again. Logan opened it, and there stood Emily holding 2 mugs, her cheeks pink from the cold, Harry's bright. "I thought I needed to run," she said, "but I realized now I was already where I belonged." He stepped aside, letting her in. And in that quiet room, with firelight dancing on the walls and a life unfolding slowly around them, a new story began. Not of endings, but of days built in togetherness, of laughter and shared purpose, of warmth and peace, and above all, of never being alone again.